Let's open up our Bibles to Matthew 15. They're going to put up a slide there. Oh, there's our lovely title. I'm just going to let it set for a minute on you and do what it might do, that word. We're going to talk about offense today. Because, you know, what other place should you talk about offense than the church, I guess? We're going to read Matthew 15 and read a story in just a minute, but real quick. If we could just be real with each other, we live in like a generation of offense. If you like to be offended, now's your time, baby. Like you are alive in the right time. Everyone seems to be offended. If you hang out with young people, or if you are a young person, you're gonna know the new trendy word you all have for offense, trigger. I'm triggered. It's like what they say if something bothers them or brings them back to a bad memory or, you know, it offends them, I'm triggered. And they love talking about it. There's all kinds of memes and, you know, all kinds of journeys to identify your triggers. Sometimes people talk so much about their triggers, I'm like, does anything not trigger you? And they're like, that question triggers me. When you ask about my triggers, I'm triggered. We get offended at the way people drive. We get offended at the way they look at us. We get offended at the way people spend their money, the way they don't spend their money, who they spend time with, who they don't spend time with, the way they dress. We just are looking for this stuff. And social media is not helping matters. And we all know that. I mean, we're all getting into family reunion fights on Facebook. Like, this is another level of offense happening. I think there's a social media meme that sums it up, and it just makes me laugh. And I don't know, it might offend some of you. But it says, you know, social media these days, and one person says, I prefer mangoes to oranges. And then the person's like, so what you're saying is you hate oranges. It's like, no. I prefer mangoes to oranges. Oh, okay, I get it. You're an orange hater. You hate oranges, and I can't believe it. And you're just mean to them, and you neglect them, and and it's just, you know, this is what happens on social media. We just flare up with offense. It's your daily dose of who's offended, who's about to be offended, who's going to get offended. You're reading through things, you're like, I know who that's going to offend, you know. So if you like to be offended, this is the time to live in. But if we could be honest, a lot of our offense, we say it's with people, but the reality behind a lot of our offense is it's with God. Now, it's not, it may be offensive to say you're offended with God. That triggers some of us. And you would never say, right? It's wrong. You can't be offended with God. So we'll say we're offended with people, but the reality behind it is we actually aren't offended with people. We're offended with God. And we find this internal dialogue that's a little bit like, God, how could you put that person in my life that offended me? God, how could you let that person think that about me? How could you let them say that about me? I'm so offended with them. God, how could you not protect me? God, how did this situation happen this way? And all the people that we blame. And I actually find a lot of us have a lot of how could you questions about God. And we say we're offended with people, but behind it is actually offense with God. I know I have had my fair share and continue to have my fair share of that temptation to get offended with God at how things are working out. And we're going to read a story in Matthew 15 that I think is perhaps one of the greatest opportunities anyone has ever had in Scripture to say to Jesus, how could you? And we might even justify it. We might even say, yeah, she's right to say that. How could you? But she chooses something else. And I'm going to give away my main point right here up front, because what I want to talk about this morning is when you refuse to be offended with God, you will access the blessing and breakthrough of God. So this story here, Matthew 15, verse 21, they'll put it up on the screens. Then Jesus went out from there and departed. Then Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon. But he did not answer her a word. And his disciples came and begged him, saying, send her away, for she is crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and knelt before him, saying, Lord, help me. And he answered, it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. She said, yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus answered her, O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire. And her daughter was healed instantly. I love this story so much, and it stirs me so deeply. And we're going to dive into it kind of line by line and just get real with it. But this woman refuses to be offended. She has a lot of opportunities to. She has a lot of moments where she could pipe up and say, how could you, Jesus? How could you? But she refuses to be offended. And because she refuses to be offended, we see her get the breakthrough she was so desperately longing for. Let me just say this. Following Jesus will cause offense. Not a fence. Offense. And it's not like, hey, maybe you might get offended if you follow Jesus. It's not like, 3 out of 10 believers are offended. It's not people who have a lot of triggers are offended. I think everybody at some point is going to get offended as you follow wholeheartedly after Jesus. And if you're easily offended, you're going to have a pretty big wake-up call. Let's just talk about what I'm talking about, offense. Offense simply means to cause, to feel upset, annoyed, or resentful. So if you're not down with the word offense, have you ever felt upset, annoyed, or resentful? Because I think we're all very familiar with those emotions, especially when it comes to Jesus and our walk with him. And Jesus offended people all the time. He showed up, and as he superimposed his kingdom onto the world, it offended things. It offended people's egos. It offended religion. It offended tradition. It offended self-righteousness. It offended entitlement. Jesus came, and he didn't offend for offense sake. It's just that light will always offend dark. Truth will always offend lies. So as Jesus came, he was offending things and people and systems. He was offending culture. So we have to understand, as we follow after God, continually what will happen is our way will get confronted with his way, and we might feel annoyed or upset or resentful. We might get offended as our thoughts get confronted with his thoughts. As our plans get confronted with his plans, following God will cause us to be offended. Jesus offends the Pharisees. This is the whole deal with the Pharisees. They're so offended at Jesus. Yes, they're jealous, they're skeptical, all the things, they're blinded. You know what actually Jesus says about their offense? He says they're blind. They're blind to the revelation of who I am. What blinded them? Their offense. Offense blinded the Pharisees to who Jesus was as he offended their way. Everything that they believed and what they were going after, Jesus came and it was so opposite. And then in John 6, Jesus says the most offensive thing you could say to Jewish people. Jesus says in John 6, he gets up in front of people and he says, I'm the bread of life. You have to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And you're like, Jesus, like if I was his friend, I'd be like, bro, you can't say that. Like, you can't say that. I'm not going to say that to you guys, right? Well, I'm not going to say that, of course. But you really can't say that to Jewish people. Like, you don't, this is defilement. This is, like years of tradition. You don't say, eat my flesh and drink my blood. But you know what? We see Jesus do it. He offends. He says it. He offends. And you know what he doesn't do? Half the people leave. A bunch of people leave. And he doesn't do what I think a lot of speakers and public leaders would do today, like run after them like, oh my gosh, don't leave. I'm so sorry. Did that come off wrong? Let me explain myself. I will never say that again. Did that offend you? Please don't unfollow me. Please don't not attend my church. Oh my gosh, you totally misunderstood me. Guys, come on back. Here, I'll say it a different way. Jesus didn't do that. You know what he did? He let the offense reveal his true disciples. And this is what Jesus does with offense. He will put offense in our path. He will cause offense to expose us. Jesus doesn't offend for offense sake, and he doesn't offend like we offend. We offend people I think some of you just get a kick out of offending people. You're like, I'm just going to say something, see what happens. We all have that family member where you're like, come on, uncle, it's Thanksgiving. Like, you really got to bring up politics. And he doesn't even have a strong opinion. He's like, it's just funny to watch people get worked up. That's not how Jesus is. Jesus isn't vengeful or rude. He is offending unto something greater. We've been talking a lot about Jesus is purposeful in everything he does. He's not wasting a moment. He's not wasting interactions with us. He's not wasting our journey. And so we need to know, when I find myself offended in my walk with God, he's doing something purposeful here. It's unto something greater. Bill Johnson says Jesus will offend the mind to reveal the heart. So if we're like, I'm just hoping to follow Jesus and not get offended and just kind of like never be challenged or rebuked, then you're dreaming. You're following the wrong guy. Jesus, because things in us need to be exposed. We need our pride exposed. We need our self-entitlement exposed. If you don't think you have entitlement, you have entitlement. How do I know if I have entitlement? You think you don't. Our self-righteousness needs to be exposed. What we trust in outside of God needs to be exposed. And so he'll use offense, and it'll pop up as an obstacle, just like it does with this woman in this story. It'll pop up as a hurdle, because on the other side of offense is the breakthrough and blessing that we're longing for. But that offense needs to expose in us. And so when we have hurdles, when Jesus is putting up what seems like hurdles in our path, it is time to lean in and ask questions. It's not time to go find a hurdle-less path. It's not time to go find someone who's not going to offend or challenge you. It is time to lean in and say, oh, I feel offended. Now that doesn't seem like you. I'm confused. What's going on? Are you doing something in me? Are you trying to evoke? Are you trying to build something in me? And this is what this story is all about. This is what happens with this woman. This woman has to overcome some serious hurdles. Like, just on the surface, we'll dive in. He ignores her, he rebukes her, and then it seems like he insults her. Now, I'm reading this story, and I'm thinking, like my sassy pants comes out. I'm thinking, excuse me, Jesus. Oh, no, if I had long nails, I'd say, oh, no, you didn't. Like, I don't know why it just seems sassier with long nails. It is so weird to me that Jesus is interacting with her this way because he went out of his way to get to her. Now, he goes to the region of Tyre and Sidon. That is the first time Jesus steps out of Jewish territory. So the first time he steps out of Jewish territory is to meet with he meets with this Gentile woman. And it's not like a little bit out of his way. It's 50 miles out of the way by foot. He goes 50 miles on foot out of his way and he knows he's the Messiah. He's all-knowing. He's not surprised by this interaction. He knows he's going to meet this woman who has this need. And then he ignores her. Then he tells her no. And then it seems like he insults her. I'm thinking, Jesus, you came to her. You ever have a situation in your life where you're like, God, I didn't ask for this. I was fine. I was fine before you asked me to do this, actually. And now I'm here, and I feel ignored. And now I'm here, and I'm confused by you, Jesus. And now I'm here, and I'm offended. I'm offended at your lack of response. I'm offended at your timetable. I'm offended at your way. You ever have a situation like that where you're like, Jesus, you're the one who came to me? After high school, I grew up in this impoverished town in the Midwest. So early on, as a teenager, I knew I needed to set my sights on college. That's kind of my ticket out. I really wanted to be the first in my family to graduate college, and I thought this is a surefire way to like some financial success. And I'm gonna get a very specific path so that I can get out of where I am. So I work really hard. If you're gonna get a scholarship, you don't start working your senior year, right? We know this. So I start working freshman year hard. AP classes, all the dumb extracurricular stuff they make you do, National Honor Society, reading to the, elderly, all the things, whatever gets me credit on a resume. And I get the scholarship. Senior year, I get a scholarship, and it's full ride to university in Indiana. And senior year, I also really started going after the Lord. Derek and I really set like, okay, you can have everything. And I hear God ask me to, instead of go to college, go to ministry school in Redding, California. A non-accredited ministry school. I'm thinking, okay, you must have something really, now I had a lot of identity and ego wrapped up into my academic achievement, right? I had found a lot of affirmation there. It was where people knew me, straight A student, I could work really hard. And so I had wrapped, like everything I was smart Becky, gonna go to college. Like this is what I'm gonna go do. And I'm gonna show this small town in Wheatfield, Indiana, like all that I can do in the big world with my big degree, like everything. And I worked hard for it. It didn't come easy. I set my sights on it, I got it. In senior year, he says, go to ministry school. So I'm like, okay, well you must have something amazing for me. Because you're asking me to give all of this up, You must have something really amazing for me. Now, I was excited to go, and we just wanted to follow God. So we're like, yeah, we're all in. So long story short, Derek and I move. We do the school of ministry. We get married. And now we've completed the school 2 years in. We are married. We are broke, and then broke, and then broke. We don't have jobs. We can't find like steady jobs that are enough for what we need. And we have no ministry opportunities and no career path forward. And I'm like, and we're lonely. We don't have community, like a lot of community. We're young. We're married. We're confused. And I'm like, God, what are you talking about? You asked me to do this. I was fine. I had a plan. You came to me. You asked me to do this. And now you're going to ignore me? And now I don't feel like I have a direction in life, and now I don't have any opportunities. I was so confused and offended in those years. And what I didn't realize is that God was exposing in me every ounce of God, you owe me. He was building faith in me that I would need, and he was exposing in Derek and I and I really did believe. I'm like, God, you owe me. I'm giving this up. I'm giving this thing I'd worked so hard for. I'm giving that up. Therefore, you owe me a dream. Therefore, you owe me an opportunity. Therefore, you owe me another path because that's what you said you were going to do. And he's like, I had just asked you to go to Reading. I didn't promise you anything. And so in those years, those broken, confused, offended years, God was exposing every you owe me until I could get to the place where I realized, oh my gosh, God, you don't owe me anything, and I owe you everything. And when I get to that place, you hit grace, you hit blessing. So when Jesus puts up obstacles, you guys, when he puts up what we feel like is offense, it's time for us to lean in. And what stirs me is this woman. She just refuses to be offended by Jesus. We're going to dive into the story. Just real quick, what I want to say is this about offense. The tricky thing about offense is that we don't recognize it or we try to justify it. When we don't recognize it and when we try to justify it, we actually never deal with it. So here's the thing. The Pharisees, in just before chapter 15 at the beginning, the Pharisees come to Jesus and his disciples, and they're like, hey, you don't wash your hands. They're talking about defilement. You don't wash your hands before you eat, therefore you're defiled. And Jesus kind of gives this very offensive and groundbreaking teaching on defilement. And he says, it's not what goes in that defiles. We're going to eat with our hands. We're going to digest it with our stomach, and we're going to eliminate it. And they're like, oh. Jesus ever talk in a way where you're like, oh, Jesus. I can't say that. He goes, that's not what defiles. It's what comes out of your heart. It's what comes out of your mouth. Defilement comes from within. And it's this whole teaching that they had never heard before. Defilement is not about external. Defilement comes from within. And the disciples, verse 12, it's hilarious. I love comedy in the Bible. His disciples came to him and said, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? Okay, anytime you're starting the sentence with Jesus with do you know? He's like, yeah. I love it. We think we're informing Jesus all the time. Jesus, hey, did you know I'm desperate over here? Jesus, did you know that I need a breakthrough? Jesus, did you know I'm mad? Jesus, did you know? He's like, yeah. Yeah, I know. You're impatient. Yeah, I know. So they're like, did you know the Pharisees are offended? Now, the Pharisees weren't saying they're offended. The Pharisees were saying they were righteous. We can mask our offense in righteousness. We can mask our offense and I'm just doing the right thing. And in reality, we're offended at what Jesus is trying to do. When my kids are offended at me, one or two things is happening. They're either entitled, which happens, I think around 3 years old it kicks in. I love my kids. Entitlement, we all get that. I mean, this is the joy of parenting. We're parenting that out, right? So you're either entitled, they're either entitled when they're offended by a parameter or boundary, or they don't trust me. They don't trust that I have their best in mind. So let's say I say, hey kids, it's early bedtime tonight, and my 9-year-old's like, oh, you know, that's about the extent of offense right now. Praise God, I'm enjoying it. I know teenage years are coming, and I know it gets worse. She's like, oh, you know, I'm like, oh, you're offended at this boundary I'm setting. You don't know that I actually can see beyond tonight. I see tomorrow we've got something to do, or you're not feeling well, sleep's going to be good for you. Therefore, I'm giving you a boundary. Now, it offends you because you don't trust I have your best in mind. You think I'm just being a mean mom. Sometimes with God, he puts a boundary up, he puts up a parameter, and we're like, oh, I'm so offended that you wouldn't let me access that or get that or have this right now. And he's like, oh, you don't trust. I see beyond this moment for you. I'm trying to build you. I'm trying to evoke something in you. He's not offending you because he's mean. He's offending you to stir something up in you. But when we don't trust him, it's hard to get there. And so we don't trust it, or we don't recognize offense, or we try to justify it. When we're giving reasons for our offense, how do you know you're living out of self-entitlement? You're giving reasons for your offense. Yep. And I hear it all the time. I'm like, you ask people, why don't you go to church anymore? Because God did A, B, and C. Like, wow, you can be offended at the God of the universe who gave everything for you? That is a sign that we have some entitlement going on when we start to think God owes us something, when we start to think that we know better, when we start to think it should look like a certain way. So we justify it or we don't recognize it. When we don't recognize that your offense actually isn't with people who hurt you, it is with God who you wanted a different outcome. So early on in my walk, I had massive trust issues. They're all healed. I trust everyone. I'm amazing. I have massive trust issues because of my upbringing, different contexts of life, lots of reasons. And I had good reasons, you guys. People have hurt me. They have misused me. They have not come through for me. And I have years of experience to back up. I have an encyclopedia of experience to back up why you shouldn't trust people. And I remember I was about 20 years old, and I was sitting with Bandy, and I'm processing this issue. And he goes, your issue isn't with people. It's not that you don't trust people. You don't trust God. I'm like, huh? Excuse me, sir. I have 2 years of ministry school experience. He goes, because what's on the other side of people? People are going to hurt you. Yes. If you're looking for the perfect person who's never going to fail you, Jesus. People are going to hurt you. So he's like, so you say you don't trust people, but in reality, Becky, you don't trust God is behind that hurt to catch you, walk with you, heal you, comfort you, redeem you, defend you. You don't trust God as your defender, so you say you don't trust people. It's actually you don't trust that God's on the other side of those failed people. And I am telling you guys, when he said that, it clicked for me. Because what I was doing is I was doing a bunch of business with man, and I actually needed to do business with God. I had my list. You know what? I've got some brave communication tools. I took some Danny Silk classes. My family's about to recognize all the ways that they've offended me. I've got a list of people. I'm just speaking truth and love. I'm so healthy and whole. You know what? And I'm going to go and confront all of these people and move towards health. And in reality, I needed to do business with God. When you do business with God, you'll find you have a lot less business to do with man. And I was wanting to confront all of these people about my hurt. Now, there's healthy confrontation, and there is, please hear me. Don't be like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to get misused and abused because, Becky said not to confront people. I'm not saying that. But I recognize my offense isn't with people. It's with God. When you don't recognize your offense, you don't deal with it properly. And if you don't deal with it properly, it's going to hold you back. Because offense, on the other side of offense, is the blessing and breakthrough that God has for you, that you're desperately longing for, just like we see with this woman. So following Jesus offends, and we recognize it, and then it's what we do in the middle of that moment, and that's what matters. Jesus' response is confusing, you guys. Like if we could, it's confusing. Let's just talk about it. I'm reading this and I'm thinking, this is not the Jesus I know. This isn't the Jesus who heals. To ignore her. This isn't the Jesus who is moved by compassion. This isn't the Jesus who forgives. What Jesus is this? He's ignoring her. He's not responding to her. He's rebuking her. He's telling her, she comes and you think like she's doing it all right. She as a Gentile, the kingdom's not even for her to begin with. And she as a Gentile and as a woman. There's another offensive thing Jesus did. He interacted with women. And she comes and she says, oh Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. She's coming as a Gentile, confessing the lordship of Jesus Christ and believing in what he can do. You can heal my daughter. I'm doing all the right things. And Jesus is still not responding in a certain way. He's trying to evoke something in her. And it's confusing in the moment. If you've ever been confused by something God is doing in your life, I was so confused in Reading. We had this 5-year period. I'm thinking, Jesus, Derek's supposed to be a full-time worship leader, singing praises to God all over the nation, and I'm supporting his career doing something in ministry. And instead, I'm a barista, and he's an accountant at a bankrupt hotel. Lord, I'm confused. How did Derek get that job? This is not the plan. This is not what I envisioned when you asked me to pack up and move across country and leave an opportunity that I had worked for 4 years. I am very confused. And when we're confused, we have an opportunity to take offense. So I had a choice to make. Am I going to let confusion and offense cause me to walk away, or am I going to cause it to make me lean in? And this woman chooses to lean in. In the midst of confusion, in the midst of offense, she chooses to lean in even harder and more assured. It is astounding, her responses here. The ground is it's set for offense. First, he ignores her. Verse 23. Jesus didn't answer her a word. It is one of my pet peeves when people ignore me. I am so, the audacity of people to ignore me, my toddler. No, I'm just kidding. Kids ignore, that's okay. But selective hearing, exactly. I hate being ignored. I'm just so irritated. I'm just irritated at Jesus, didn't answer her a word. That right there would be enough for most of us in this room to walk away and be like, hypocrite, not who you said you were. Jesus doesn't ignore. But she doesn't. She doesn't let the confusion of that moment and the opportunity for offense make her walk away. She's about to go through a lot more. He ignores her, and she doesn't walk away. She shows up. I know who Jesus is, and I know what he can do. And she doesn't let the confusion of that moment take away her confession of who Jesus is. Jesus. She's there. I don't know if you've ever felt ignored by God. Again, that time in Reading when we just felt so off kilter. It wasn't like our life just was not on the course that we thought. Derek's at this, again, you stick a creative musician as an accountant in a struggling hotel. It was weird. It was a weird time. It was a confusing time. It was an offensive time in our journey. And I would just sit there in our sketchy apartment in the, where we were, because it's what we could afford. And I would just open my Bible up to certain passages that I felt were promises, and I would just contend. I'd ask God for direction, put us in a different place, give us a different career path, help our marriage. And I felt like my prayers were just of no avail. I just felt like they were useless. And in moments of feeling ignored by God, you know what he was doing? Becky, will you still confess who I am and what I can do? Or are you going to get offended and walk away because I'm silent for a moment? He's not ignoring us because he's mean. He wasn't ignoring her out of spite. There is nothing malicious about Jesus. So if he's ignoring her, it's unto something. He's inviting her in. Maybe he's not ignoring you. Maybe he's developing you. So the disciples get offended, and they beg Jesus to send her away. Verse 23. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. Again, I'm like, okay, she's getting through Jesus ignoring. And the disciples, they weren't encouraging her. They weren't like, Jesus does this all the time. Just keep asking. You got to come when he just ate some fish and loaves. He's tired and cranky. You got to stick around. They're annoyed. I don't know how long she's following him. I don't know how loud she's being, but they come to him and they're some translations say they beg him. They beg him, send her away. Now scholars debate, are they saying, heal her daughter, just give her what she wants and send her, or are they saying, tell her to leave us? Either regard, they're offended and annoyed at her. You ever get offended and annoyed at other followers of Jesus? No, not you. Someone at home, of course. But here's the thing. Wouldn't the enemy love to distract us from our pursuit of God by getting us squabbling with each other on social media? Wouldn't he love to cause some division because we're bothered at what other followers of Jesus are saying and doing? This woman doesn't even pay attention. She doesn't even give them a thought. She doesn't respond to them. She just keeps coming. I know who Jesus is, and I know what he can do. They're like, send her away. She's so annoying. You know they've got to be desperate when they're begging Jesus to get rid of this woman. She does not let their opinion of her distract her from her pursuit of God. Right there would be enough ammunition for her to start a whole social media campaign on how hypocritical Jesus is, and, well, you should see his disciples, these people who say they're just like Jesus. Well, they got offended at me, and they tried to send me away, and this Jesus that everybody says is kind and coming, and, to bring redemption and freedom, this Jesus that everybody's talking about and been waiting for, he ignored me. He's not responding to me, and his disciples wanted me to go away. Let's cancel him. Cancel all a lot of them. Wait until I tell all the land. She's not writing on tablets of stone her gossip piece about how Jesus treated her and his disciples. She stays in the midst of that offense, in the midst of that confusion, in the midst of that, seeming that probably caused some pain. She stays. Can our faith in the Messiah move us beyond getting offended? I know who Jesus is, and I know what he can do. And you would think that's pretty bad. It can't get any worse. And then it does. Verse 24, he rebukes her. He says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. He's saying, this isn't for you, what I have. Doesn't explain it. He doesn't say, but I'm going to make an exception. It's just a straight, I'm for Israel, not for you. Oh, what is our response when Jesus gives us a rebuke? A lot of us walk away. We walk away hurt, wounded, the truth cuts us. We hear something we don't like. We hear something challenging. And you might not full on walk away from the faith, but you come into church the next week a little more guarded. You come a little bit less expressive in worship. You distance yourself from the word a little bit more. You begin to invest your truth into other places and people and things because I don't like how Jesus is treating me right now. I don't like this. I feel ignored by this. This is taking longer than I thought. I'm having to be persistent. And now he's challenging me. I don't like what he's saying. We have choices to make. The moment, what we do with the opportunity for offense, the decision we make makes all the difference because what does she do? What's her response? Verse 25. The woman came and knelt before him. He says, I didn't come for you. And she comes and she kneels before him and says, Lord, help me. She gets humble. Offense reveals our pride. And her faith in who Jesus was brings her to the ultimate humility. Some translations say she knelt and worshiped him. In the middle of our offense, could we get so low to get on our knees and say, Jesus, I worship you. I don't understand this. This isn't the outcome I wanted. I'm kind of offended. I've got other people's voices. But Jesus, I know who you are, and I know what you can do. You're the Messiah, oh Lord, Son of David, able to heal my daughter. You're the God of breakthrough. You're the God of provision. You're the God of miracles. You're the God of my future. You're the God of my family. It doesn't look like that. I'm offended. I'm frustrated. I'm confused. Yet I will still come and kneel down and worship Jesus in the midst of my offense. Because that's what she does. She worships him. She gets down on her knees after he's ignored her. And the disciples say, go away. And then he says, I'm not for you. She comes and her worship is so focused. She's undeterred. It's the moments that are, and she's coming for her daughter. All the mamas know how much this means. My daughter's sick right now at home. I would give anything to bring her immediate healing, to bring her relief, to bring her breakthrough. I would give her anything. She's just, at home with the fever, but I'm like, she weighs on my heart. It is the things that are most precious to us. Our future, our family, our finances, the things that we hold the most dear, that we get the most desperate for. It's those things that have the greatest opportunity for us to be offended, and it's those things where we need to get the lowest. It's the things that are this isn't like, I'm offended I didn't get a parking spot at the Galleria on a Saturday. Jesus, I prayed when we're like praying for front row parking, which is great. Hallelujah, when he does it. Won't he do it? But it's not like, we don't get offended when that doesn't happen. But we get offended when we can't pay the bills. We get offended when our kids who we raised in church aren't walking with him like we thought they would. We get offended when our future has taken a completely different course than we wanted. You start hitting the things that are close to home, and there is an opportunity for offense. And it's in those moments that our response isn't to get bigger and louder and resentful and annoyed. She doesn't come and say, Jesus, you came to me. Jesus. She doesn't come, here's the case. This is who you say you are, but this is how you're acting and your disciples. And what about your word? She doesn't do any of that. She doesn't convince him. She doesn't get meaner. She gets low. What does she do? Jesus, help me. I'm on my knees. I worship you. You are the Son of God. I know who you are, and I know what you can do, and I know you want to. Yes. This is what we need to do when we hit those moments of just complete desperation. We go in. We get humble. Her faith makes her humble. And you think, okay, this is it. She's had enough. If he doesn't respond to the on my knees, Lord, help me, maybe he's not going to. Or you think at this point in the story, if you've never read it before and you don't know the ending, you think, Jesus, do something. Like, surely she's doing all the right things. It's not about a formula. It's about a heart cry. It's not about all the right prayers. It's about your offense getting exposed. And he says, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Ouch. Right there, she could have been like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I am done following you. I am done believing in you. I am done asking of you. I am done praying to you. I am done believing in you. I have been ignored. You told me it's not for me. Your disciples want to send me away. And now you're saying I'm a dog? You use this term. This is what they called it. It was a derogatory term, what they called the Canaanites. And he goes, I can't take their bread and toss it to the dogs. Oh, man. This is where the lies start to creep in. Maybe Jesus isn't for you. Maybe you didn't hear him right. Maybe he's not all that he said he is. Maybe his truth isn't final authority. Maybe generosity isn't the way. Maybe, and it's in these moments where we could be the most confused and offended, where lies begin to creep in. I totally had to battle lies in those, however many years we were in that situation of just not seeing where God was taking us. Our future seemed so cloudy. I didn't understand. I'm like, maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe I don't hear God. And then I'm thinking, we have so many prophetic words about Derek leading worship and me being in ministry, and it is so far from reality that I'm thinking, okay, prophecy is not real. Like, all these prophetic people are just crazy, which they are crazy in the best ways. I'm like, they're wrong. How could I am not kidding you. Derek, he's my husband, the worship pastor here. I've been with him for 17 years. I have never seen him get a prophetic word that wasn't about leading worship, ever. It's the most bizarre thing. And yet he was an accountant at a hotel for 6 years. Like, not walking in ministry. And so in those 6 years, now we couldn't see what was beyond that, and look where Derek is now, where I'm like, I guess they're all wrong. Because you're getting promoted at this hotel. Maybe this is what God wants you to do. Derek, maybe you should abandon your dream. Maybe it's not what he's promised you. When we're confused and offended and God's delayed and things look different, we can start to question him, and we can start to partner with lies. And the only person that can make that choice to partner with a lie or not is you. And we could preach and we could worship and we could do all the things, but there's an internal choice to make. I am not going to partner with lies. She chose. For us to think that this was an easy choice for her, we'd be naive. You got to read a little bit into the surface of this is her daughter. And Jesus shows up in her territory. She's thinking, oh, is it a sign? Like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. I don't know what mild demon possession looks like, but hers is severe. So it's bad. And she shows up, Son of David, have mercy on me. Finally, you're here. No one else can cast out demons. No one else can bring healing to my daughter. And through all of this, again, we see again and again, she's just climbing over the fence, climbing over a fence, going over hurdles, pressing in, pressing in, pressing in. I refuse to believe you don't care about me, Jesus. I refuse to believe I didn't hear your word. I refuse to believe that you are for me and not against me. I refuse to believe that you are the God of wonder, miracle working power, and that's what you can do in my life. And she kneels down, and Jesus says, but it's not right to take the bread and give it to the dogs. And here, in one of the greatest responses I just love so much, and I love that it's a woman. She goes, yeah, Lord, I recognize it's not right. Yet even dogs get scraps from their master's table. And Jesus turns around or whatever, looks at her, and here's what he's been waiting for the entire time. Here's what all of the challenge was about. Can I find faith in you that's moved beyond offense that you could have chosen? And you said, yet even in the midst of your offense and confusion and lack of breakthrough, could you say, yet even I will praise you, yet even I will trust you, yet even I will serve you, yet even I will surrender to you, yet even I will pray to you, yet even are two faith-filled words that we need to find. Yet even dogs get scraps from their master's table. Oh, woman, great is your faith. And then you know what? You know what happens? She breaks through a fence. She breaks through. And what does she access? It puts that woman in new territory. It's not a journey of healing. He doesn't say, here, take this oil that take this cloth I've anointed. Make the journey back to your daughter. Put it on her forehead. Say this prayer. Her daughter is healed instantly from a distance. You talk about the miracle and blessing of God that's on the other side of a fence. It's supernatural. It's completely supernatural. He was trying to evoke in her faith. What's your response here? Worship team can come on up. Yet even, it's interesting. No one in Scripture Jesus doesn't give anyone else in Scripture a direct compliment on their faith. He says that the Roman centurion has great faith, but he says it to the crowd. She is the only person, a Canaanite, ancient enemy of Israel, a woman not regarded as equal, to receive a direct compliment from Jesus. You know what pleases him? Faith. Yes. You know what pleases him? A refusal to be offended. Yes. Can we find our yet evens? When you move beyond offense, you access the blessing. That's just what it is. What does it look like on the other side of offense? Instead of being offended at what he's asked you to surrender, maybe you let go, and then he's able to move through your life. God, I don't like this. I don't understand this. Doesn't make sense to me that I'd let this go, yet even I will surrender to you. Instead of being offended that things aren't working out the way you wanted, my life looks upside down, doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of other things I could choose. There's a lot of guaranteed success, another path, yet even I will choose what you have for me. Maybe instead of being offended at the people that God's put in your life to receive from, you just say, I'll receive their wisdom and their blessing and their guidance in my life. I won't let offense stand in the way of my destiny, vision, mentorship, leadership, whatever. Offense is always an easier choice. You talk to offended people. They're not struggling on the offense bus. They're not like, it's really hard for me, but I'm just offended. It's really difficult for me, but I'm so offended at you. No, what do they say is hard? Forgiveness. It's hard for me, but I forgive them. It is hard for me, but I am not going to be offended. It's hard for me, but I trust God with my reputation. It's hard for me, but I trust that God is for me. It's hard for me, but I bless them and release them. It's hard for me, but I will not be offended at my Lord. Because he is longing. He wanted to heal her daughter. He was going to. He knew. He's working something out in her. I doubt that woman lost faith again or ever. She didn't lose faith in the first place. Faith-filled people are unoffendable. I think true faith moves us beyond offense and allows us to access the blessing.